My name is Kim Leeson. My husband David Leeson and I have been judging this photojournalism contest. I have been a freelance photographer for the last 11 years in Dallas, covering lots of events, news, portraits. Before that, I was a staff photographer at the Dallas Morning News over an 11-year period.
And I'm David Leeson, and thank you for allowing us the privilege of judging your images. I've worked at various newspapers throughout the years, mostly at the Dallas Morning News, for a more than 30-year career that has spanned the globe and covered conflicts both here and far. So hopefully you'll enjoy our selections and our comments. Thank you. Our approach to judging this contest and all others that we've judged throughout the years primarily begins with content and the moment. The moment, of course, where it's described by Cartier-Bresson as the decisive moment. But the decisive moment can be very subtle at times and very profound. And how do we achieve that? That's where we judge our next level, and that is lighting, composition, the various elements of foundations of good photography. But mostly photojournalism is judged by the power of the moment, or shall we just say, the power of its content. Our first image here is Passport Please with a score of 8. And the things that will work in the photograph is that it's very linear. In other words, if you look at the graphical aspect of the photo, it's very much straight lines up and down. However, it fails to bring about a powerful moment primarily because of cropping. It's a little too loose. And the car in the background is very distracting with the red light and all that. It would have been better to have shifted positions, say, probably to the left, in order to get a much better photograph of the scene.
Although I do like the way the lady's face is framed within that shape behind her, but the photographer could have zeroed in a little bit closer on the actual moment that's happening between the officer and the woman. We don't need all that extraneous information on the outside. This image is called Father and Daughter Working on a Project. We gave it a score of 9. It's a nice moment between a father and daughter, and it's tightly framed, but the woman in the back with the cell phone is highly distracting and does not contribute to the image.
I would agree that it's primarily the reason why this image didn't rate higher than it did is primarily because of the distractions of the background and, of course, of shutter speed with that blurred hammer. That's the one thing we need to see sharp.
This image is called Half Second Short. We gave it a score of 10. The main thing about this image that bothered me was the lower left-hand corner needed to be cropped out.
I would agree that it's that lower left-hand corner that's really disturbing. The second thing that bothers me just a tad, not a whole lot, it's not a major thing, is the row of cowboys in the back are really a central point to the image because the rider himself is falling on the other side of the bull. And that's okay, but it's mostly the reason why it didn't rate higher is because of background distractions, which I know the background of writing and stuff in the background of this image you couldn't control, but you can certainly control composition.
This photograph, called Weekend Warrior, has a score of 11. I did like the way the photographer came in nice and tight, cropped it close, and that early morning or late afternoon light is really attractive.
Yeah, I think that one of the primary elements that we chose this photograph for was the light. However, compositionally, there's no real strong rule of thirds compositional element taking place here. If you laid the rule of thirds across this image, you'd see exactly what I'm talking about. This image, titled Nature Garbage Cleaner, question mark, question mark, question mark. We gave this a score of 11 and an honorable mention by the photographer George Wan. And I particularly liked the image because I found it very humorous. So you see, once again, content rules here. The fact that we're used to seeing squirrels eating nuts and pecans and whatever, you know, the stuff they eat. And here's one trying to clean something off of some foil and probably eating a good deal of the foil.
And the shallow depth of field here is definitely a must, and it photographer executed that very well.
This image, Moroccan Mosaic, we gave a score of 13 and a third place to Nancy Mack. It is a photo that is what we would describe in photojournalism as almost but not quite, and yet it has enough of the moment and enough content in it to really bring it above some of the others. The primary distracting elements, of course, are the clutter and junk in the background, which would have required using a little higher angle, shooting more downward upon this image to make it better. And the second one is that it really needs to be a lot snappier, a lot more saturated, a lot darker.
More contrast, maybe. This photo was called In the Wide Alley of Chun King. We gave it a 14 and a second place to Kathy Lynn. What pops out to me is the colors and the framing in the interesting high angle.
I agree. I like the colors a lot, and the lighting is really beautiful. I like the composition here, even though our subjects primarily fall sort of in the center, but it's a very linear image with a lot of balance with the photographs in the background. I think the central focus helps a lot. There's not much I could say as how to improve an image like this, so let's just leave it at that.
This image titled Too Cute to Ignore, we gave it a 14, and top honors at first place to Leslie Johnston because she captured a very sweet, just a lovely moment between this chef and these dogs. Even the slight blur in the tail is working here to show motion. It's all about the moment here.
Yes, I think the power of the image itself is found in the moment, and it is a great moment. It's lovely. But where it could be better would be better composition. Here's a situation where having the central weighted composition with that trash can in the background really hurts the image. It should have been cropped a little more off of the right so that we could have less distractions in the background, lead us more directly into the moment.
Well, I have to disagree with my fellow judge here because I think it's perfectly composed and the center weighted is working really well here. This image is called Long Forgotten. We gave it a score of 7. I don't find much journalistic value here. I probably wouldn't have entered it in the photojournalism category.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult to say that there's any moment here. I'm sure the moments occur here, but not with the fireplace. It would be within the lighting and the background, the foreground. But in this case, it's really just sort of a straight-on.
Just a record shot.
Yeah, it's a mug shot of an old chimney.
This is called Always Use Spell Check. Gave it a score of 8. It's funny. It made us laugh. But there's really nothing creative about the way this is composed or framed or anything. We just thought the misspellings were funny.
Yeah, likewise, which means that we're talking about content. At least there is some content here. It's not a very strong image, but it is pretty funny. It looks like something you put on Pinterest. But I also like the way the photographer used the title, Always Use Spell Check. Of course, photographer, has said always with 2 L's and spell check with 1 L. So that's rather clever.
This image would probably go viral on Facebook just because it makes you laugh, but it's not a contest-worthy entry.
This image titled Magic Disappearing Shoe, last seen on this girl's foot, ! Was given a score of 8. And the problem with this image is that the moment is not strong enough. It really resides upon the title to even point out the fact that she's missing a shoe, which you can barely see a little bit of the shoe at the left. But even if it were more prevalent, it still would be a difficult image to judge higher than what it's been given here because of the angle and the lens choice.
This is called Fire in Break Room. We gave it a score of 10.
and got some interest in it with that beautiful red glow. Anytime viewers see something really colorful and vibrant in an image, it draws your eyes. Unfortunately, in this case, it draws your eyes almost away from the firefighter that's visible at far left. For sure, it needed to be cropped from the top. If there's anything left on that side over there, which it appears there would be because it's a square, then it would be nice to see a little bit more room given to the composition on the left side of the picture, which would bring the firefighter in more prominence. And it would also, by going off the top, eliminate that distracting exit sign. Anytime people see words in an image, their eyes will go to the image first. And you have to ask yourself, is that what you want them to see?
This photo is called Tornado Aftermath. We gave it a 12. And the Honorable Mention Award for this image goes to Janet Davenport. It was pretty interesting. I like the leading lines of that pole leading to the side leads you to the sign, and then back throughout the image. All the information kind of works together to tell a story. This photo, called Grandson Keeps Working, after food icon Willie Mae's death in 2015, got a score of 14 and a third place honor to Valerie Johnson. I love the low angle that she took, setting the subject up against the sky for a really clean and graphic composition that frames him well.
However, you have to be careful about the expressions as related to the subject matter in the content. Here we're talking about someone's death, and yet this guy's got kind of a half smile and he's giving a thumbs up. So I think it doesn't quite work with at least the story that we know. This image, titled Close Finish at Bridgehampton circa 1958, was given a score of 14 and a second place finish by Vincent Carroll. And one thing I particularly like, in this case, motion blur works really well to indicate speed. Of course, it has a strong vintage feel because, well, it is vintage, but beside the point, it has good composition, very strong linear lines going through this image from both top to bottom that all fall well within the rule of thirds.
And the motion thing here is working really well, executed perfectly. The only thing I would have done here is just retouch over those little white dust specks. This picture is called Promise to Fellow Soldiers, Honor Guard at Tomb of Unknown Soldier, Arlington National Cemetery. We gave it a top score 15 by Min Yang for first place. And it's a very quiet, sad moment. It tells the story. You quickly know what's happening here. Just probably would have cropped the bayonet out the top. It's a little distracting, as is that little white thing in the bottom right-hand corner. But the raindrops here are really a beautiful thing, captured perfectly.
I agree. Only one other thing that I wish it were taking place here is that I wish it were more aligned with the rule of thirds and less center-weighted, which would have meant moving probably the soldier a little bit to the right while you were composing the image, just to give a little forward room for him to walk into. This image, titled The Rebuilt City, was given a score of 10. It has a pretty strong composition, and it does have content. It's interesting to a point. However, it doesn't bring anything new to the subject matter. We've all seen these aerials. We've all seen things like this. And my qualification for judging these kinds of images is it has to be as good or better than anything I've ever seen. And of course, this one is not quite that, but it is a lovely photo. It is too blue. It does need to be darker. It needs a little more contrast or clarity.
This is a well-done basic skyline shot. The lighting is not interesting here, and the composition is very basic, therefore it's not a contest winner. This photo, Acqua Alta in Venice, otherwise in English called High Water in Venice, got a score of 10. I kind of liked this one. I liked looking at just the feet. It's kind of a detail shot. But the lady's purse is kind of distracting. I think the photographer could have taken a lower angle and come in a little tighter to eliminate the lady's bag.
I think more depth of field would have been advantageous here. This image also needs more saturation and perhaps a bit of edge burning around the edges so that our eyes don't get lost in the white that trails us away from the image, and definitely a lower angle, because that is just a little bit of a crop that I would say almost, but not quite.
This photo called Snowman got a 10. And it's cute. I mean, the kids are cute, but this just looks sort of like a, happy snap photo of kids cheesing for the camera. I don't consider this photojournalistic in any way.
This is an image where Kim and I disagreed. I actually think it does have photojournalistic content in it simply because of the moments. I think the composition is pretty darn good, and it's a fun moment. Just the fact that it looks like a snapshot and is very direct does not immediately connotate that it's not photojournalistic.
I just have to say that this situation, certainly there was a real moment of them building that snowman that would have been more delightful as a photojournalistic moment rather than a posed one.
I can't disagree with her there. My comments are directed only to the fact that this is what we're looking at. I still thought it was a lot of fun, and that with some nice colors.
This photo compilation is titled Creed Fire Department Propane Training Collage. We gave it an 11.
And I have to say, for me personally, this collage approach is really the wrong idea, especially whenever all of the photos except for the upper left-hand corner, and of course that middle one, which is a non-photo at the top, they're all the same image, essentially. We're not being given any additional new information. Editing is the elimination of the non-essential, and there's a lot of non-essential here. There's no reason at all to have presented a whole lot of photographs because it doesn't help the photograph, the single image. But using all of these images together does not connotate or become the power of a single image. If you want it as a photo essay, this is not the way photo essays are done.
And the photographer is clearly enamored with fire and the spray of the water, but the firefighters who are supposedly training are just standing around doing nothing. So we needed to see a little more action from the firefighters in order to make these photos journalistic.
This image, titled Sound of the Heaven, was given a score of 12. I personally was not a big fan of the image. Image flare doesn't bother me, except in situations like this where it's sort of there but not there at the same time. I also disliked the looseness of this image. There's a lot of distracting elements on both the outside edges, across the entire image on the outside edges. It's as though the whole thing needs to be brought in a little tighter, maybe a lot tighter. I think your moment is taking place right there between the interaction between the two central players looking at one another. Everything else is extraneous.
I did like the backlighting. I think it's pretty. I liked the interactive moment, but there's too much dodging in the shadows down below. It gives sort of a dark edge that doesn't look right. This image, The Entertainer, got a 13. And an honorable mention to Jim Walsh. It's just a good, solid concert photo, tightly composed. Shallow depth of field is nice because it zooms it right in on her and leaves the instrument slightly out of focus, which draws your eye to her.
I agree with Kim that the expression on the woman in the photograph is really good, but I am disturbed somewhat by the symbol in the foreground that sort of splits the image in two and how it just about slices the top of her head off the edge of the symbol.
The third place went to Polo Match with a score of 13 to Bud Barlow. Tightly cropped. It's good action. The ball stands out, except the foreground could have been dodged or burned down a little bit darker just to make that ball pop out against the light colored dirt.
Yeah, I agree that it needed some edge burning or something to bring a matte to bring down that foreground color because that ball is almost lost. The other thing I didn't like about this is that it appears to be, at least in the copy of the image we have, a tad back focused. That's why those flags in the background seem to be a little sharper than the numbers in a jersey.
This one is called Oomph with a score of 14 and a second place to Jerry Schlesinger. And it's a little awkward compositionally and crop wise, but points go to him for capturing the moment.
Yes, although I wonder if it's really oomph, as Kim said, or if it's oomph. But either way, it is a nice image, but the cropping is a tad awkward. There's not a lot I could say of how to fix that. You either go tighter here, or you go looser, or go home. This image, titled Remembering, was given a score of 15 and a first place finish in the category by James Edward. And I think it's a very powerful and strong moment. And I hate that there's only simple things that could be fixed that would have made this a lot better image. It needed to be cropped from the bottom, perhaps above the little pipeline thing you see in the background, that little strip of silver, definitely above the cuff where we don't see all of his hand. And more importantly, it needs to be straightened so that it doesn't appear as though this man is pushing the thing over as he leans against it. It is a very strong moment and really well done, except for those easily fixable.
Tighter crop and more straight. This is called What Do I Do Now? We give it a 7. And this situation had all the makings of good photojournalism except for really bad cropping. The bag on the bottom, the cars on the right is totally unnecessary. Also, there was a moment happening here, but you can't really tell because one face is blocking the other. Photographer should have gotten a lot closer. This one's called Jordan River Baptism with a score of 7. You know, there's a human moment happening here, but that railing ruins it for me.
Yeah, same thing here. And I know that there's probably not a lot you could do with that, depending upon the restrictions of the event. But if it were possible to actually get up close to that railing and shoot more downward upon this scene, then it might have been better. But there's nothing much you could have done about those distracting yellow floating buoys in the background. This image, titled In Full Colors, was given a score of 8. Really, neither of us like the image that much, but it does have at least something of a moment going on here. The color adds to it somehow. The composition's pretty good, although I wonder why it would be a square composition. I think a more linear, longer, horizontal type composition is much better in a parade situation like this. And finally, there needs to be a lot more subject to background separation here.
This would have been a perfect situation for a super long lens and a really tight crop on that face, waving hand, and feathers. Also, because the crowd is not looking at this person, the background's not working with the subject. Beginner Soccer League Action got a score of 9. I'm a mom and I've shot my kids' soccer games, so I would have been perfectly happy to get a photo like this. But from a sports photographer's perspective, it needs to be cropped much tighter down to the action.
Yes, I would agree that it just needs to have more action, but it's going to be difficult to get a lot of action out of youth soccer. Although it does happen, it's kind of hard to get. But the other element that really bothered me a lot was the depth of field in this image. It should have been a lot shallower, so at least we could have obscured that fence back there. Or perhaps, if possible, shoot from a little higher angle so that it could be cropped out entirely.
This photo, called Working Underground, got a 9. I do like the colors, the complementary colors here, and the graphic lines kind of point you toward the subject, but I don't like the way he's looking at me. Why not photograph him actually playing?
I think the most disturbing element is exactly as Kim says, him staring directly at the photo with sort of a, what am I supposed to do here kind of gaze. Also, to be honest, I like the train back there, but I'm really confused. It appears as though he's at the end of the stop, I guess. Things like that you have to think about, because if you're raising more questions than you're answering in photojournalism, then that can be problematic sometimes, and yet helpful at other times. The Trinity River in Flood photo was given a score of 9, and it's so unfortunate when you see a great opportunity ruined by just an improper use of an angle. Simply shifting more to the left would have made this a lot stronger, where the crop would have fallen somewhere behind the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge in the background and would have included more of downtown. the entire huge 1/3 of the image on the right-hand side provides little or no information that would add to.
It's a construction zone, unattractive.
Yes, it is unattractive. It should be shifted to the left. This image, titled Anything But a Boat, Children's Competition During Regatta, was given a score of 9. I thought it was a fairly delightful image. It's got good composition. There's lots of strong moments going on. And I think one of the central ones are the fact that the boy in the foreground at left is pointing somewhere. There's another child, or there's two of them in the water. And then there's another boy at the top left pointing at something. There's a lot of stuff happening here. And then there's this one lone young lady at the far right bottom that really helps make the image. However, that's part of its problem, too, is that there's no central focus on the moment here.
This picture is called Trumpeter on the Square. We gave it a 9. Not really sure what to look at here. Is it the building or the guy? I think it would have been a neat opportunity to really come in tight on the guy, have more of an entry point into this photograph.
Certainly, that's absolutely true. There are ways to make more focus upon this trumpeter and still include the image of the courthouse in the background instead of putting him into some sort of juxtapositional fight for the viewer's eyes. One way would be to simply move with a wider angle down low, perhaps about 3 feet in front of that trumpeter, and allow that courthouse to loom up from behind him.
Basically, just a more creative angle would have helped this one. This one's called Aftermath of Tornado, 12/26/15. It got a score of 10. I liked it. It's just sort of odd in its simplicity but strange content. It's a very straightforward image, but this is all about what's happening here. There's nothing really creative about the photographer's approach.
Yeah, I think it's just a record shot. I wasn't exactly into this photo at all, except for, it has content. Let's say it has information. But in order to really capture a viewer's eye, there has to be more of a central focus on the image, something that brings the image to the viewer's eyes and draws them in so that it's very clearly a point of view to it. This is really it's just a little more than a record shot that also needs to be a lot better toning, knocking down that really bright grass in the foreground.
This one's called Roadside Assistance, got a score of 10. It's thoughtfully composed with the bike kind of in the left-hand corner and the road, top right, blue bonnets in the bottom right. But I don't like people's backs, and I can't see either one of their faces, so it's not really that engaging.
The problem I have with the image is that, first, it's center weighted. I know that the compositional element of the road is sort of a leading line, bringing you into the image and out of it at the same time. But you know what? A shift of just about 3 to 4 feet, maybe 5 feet to the left by the photographer could have put that same leading line running down the mid to left side of the image, while also would have provided us with a greater view of what's actually taking place here. I can't make sense of it. There's far too much background clutter and foreground clutter.
This photo is called Blacksmiths-2. It got a 10. It's a really nice opportunity for some cool imagery, but I don't really know what's happening here. The guy on the right, it's sort of a non-moment, and I don't know what he's doing. The guy on the left is sort of awkwardly cropped right across the back of his backside. It needed to come in tighter on the right, tighter on the bottom, and I needed to see what they're actually doing. I can't figure it out.
I agree. I couldn't figure it out. Compositionally, it's done relatively well, although I agree with Kim. It needs to be more on the left-hand side and less on the bottom. However, the main problem is, what in the heck are they doing? And then secondly, would be in the title. Sometimes in a title you can provide perhaps some information about what they're actually doing. Blacksmiths, we know, well, that is pretty to the point. However, the -2 makes me wonder if maybe -1 was better.
This picture is called Helping. It got a score of 12 and an honorable mention for Lois Lehman. And I really like it. I like the leading lines. It's kind of a strange way to photograph this type of a situation. I do like the way she composed the workers on the far right, and they're not centered, but a lower angle, maybe setting their heads out up against the sky instead of mixed in with all that background clutter would have made this better.
I would say a lower angle and to the right would have made it better. I didn't like the railroad crossing sign coming out of the guy's head in the foreground walking towards the scene, but otherwise it's a pretty darn good image. In the race, got a score of 12 and an honorable mention going to Charlotte Hasty. I liked the photo. Here's a really good use of movement where panning with the subject, it's not as easy as it sounds, especially to get the primary focal point of the image tack sharp, and she did that with the guy's face. I really like the image. I wish it were a lot darker, certainly just maybe darker in the background. The foreground with maybe use of some mats or something in Photoshop or Lightroom, but make this a little darker, a little more saturated, would really make it pop. But otherwise, I really like it. It's good use of a camera.
3 Generation Fun got a 14 and a third place for Dennis Fritsch. This is very cleanly composed, simple elements, a lot happening here, a lot interaction, but it's all very nicely done, very clean, and all the little boy looking down at the man, the woman looking in from the left, it's all circular and works well together.
I think a lower angle would have helped to eliminate the background clutter of this image and helped improve a more focal point on the foreground subjects. I like the moment. I like the interaction between them. I like the leading lines and how this image works compositionally. And I'm not going to be so horrible as to quibble about the dog being split in half by the legs, because there's really not much you could do about that. And even regardless, it's still a nice, fun moment and a pretty strong picture. This image, Ride 'em Cowboy, got a score of 14 and a second place finish going to Larry Paterborg. I liked the photo with the compositional. It's got strong composition and it's got wonderful light and a pretty strong moment. That's actually, by the way, having shot a lot of rodeos, that is a key element when they first come out of that shoot. But I think it could have been cropped on the left and the right to strengthen it some, to get rid of the lettering and the writing. This image, titled Santa Gets Mobbed, Frisco, Texas, had a score of 15 and took first place and best in competition to photographer Jose Artiles. Well, I absolutely love the photo. It stood out as the clear winner of Best in Competition at the first moment I saw it. And believe me, shooting a Santa Claus or a guy playing Santa Claus around Christmas time, it's pretty difficult to do something better than what you've ever seen before, because this would be a rather cliche image. However, the photographer has taken a good lens use, good angle, got right in the middle of things, and really produced something really fun. I haven't seen an image quite like this, and I certainly never shot one, and I think it's really well done. With the exception, it sure needs a little cropping off of the right side in particular, and perhaps a tad off the bottom, and maybe a little off the left, but that doesn't disturb me as much. But I really like the image. It's a good scene setter. It's got a pretty fun moment, and yes, he is getting mobbed, but look at those, what he's holding, that little piece of peppermint candy, and that makes it even more fun. It's as though this entire mob scene is trying to get that one piece of candy. If you look at the little kids on the left, they're like, man, they've got their eyes on the prize.
You have to be careful with the super wide lens because the faces are starting to get a little distorted on the corners, and definitely take that sleeve out on the far right. But what the photographer did right here is he got in the middle of the action. He was a part of the moment, and a lot of amateur photographers are afraid to get close to their subjects. They're afraid to get in the midst of things, and the photography shows where here the photographer got right in close, wasn't afraid, wasn't too timid, wasn't standoffish, and that's what made the image great.
Kim and I want to thank you for the opportunity to judge your competition. We take things seriously. We don't take ourselves seriously, but we certainly take things like this seriously. So we put our very best efforts into it. I will say, across the board, the very best images did rise to the top. There seems to be a lot of gaps between the best and the not so best. But overall, it was a really fun thing to do, to look at some wonderful images. And let's say that any of these images are powerful to certainly the person who shot them, and that's understandable, as they have a story and a place in their life, and that is a powerful thing to say. That is a powerful element of good photography in general, is that it speaks a story. Whether it speaks to just you and your family, then that's fine. But photojournalism is about trying to find a universal theme, something that relates to everyone's narrative, things that we know, that we have experienced ourselves, and that's where you'll really draw the power of photojournalism in a moment. Thank you.